To episode 21 of Kowalski Analysis. Very excited to be with y'all today, depending on what time you're listening to this or watching this. But I have a great guest on the show today. I actually have the grandson of the amazing Billy Graham, and his name is Tullian Tchividjian. I think I pronounced that right. But before I bring Tullian in, I just wanted to tell you about a couple things. One, I wanted to talk about City Fam. So y'all have heard me mention it a lot. I'm always wearing the t-shirts, got the sign behind me. But City Fam is a community that I started a few years ago with a friend of mine named Billy Lofton. And it really was to help people that are wanting to become the best version of themselves, find other like-minded people, and enjoy the process. So we really try to make it as fun as possible to, do your personal development, I guess, for lack of a better term. But I know for me, when I really started down this road, life got really boring and lonely, and I just couldn't find a group of people that I could relate to hang out with. And I isolated for several years until eventually I just couldn't take it anymore. And I went back to the bars. And, after making a mess, because I picked up a lot of their bad habits, I realized how much of a problem this was. And I decided, it shouldn't be, having fun and doing the right thing shouldn't be mutually exclusive. So that's really what we're about at City Fam. We're like, hey, look, let's go after our long-term goals. Let's support each other in the process. Let's give a shit about each other, but let's also have a good time. So at City Fam, we really do our best to push the envelope and enjoy life to the fullest, but not cross that line, because we know that we're all going somewhere and we all have these goals that we want to reach. So if you're not already a member of City Fam, go to the website, join the fam, www.cityfam.com. It's free. You'll get on our email list. We have people all over the world that have done this, and we're connecting them. We actually have a cohort that we're starting in it just started last Saturday, should I say. But we have another one that's going to be starting in December. And we really want to get people into our system, connect them with other like-minded people, and show them how they can bring genuine community to the part of the world that they're responsible for. So go to cityfam.com, register. If you want to, you can even send an email to me, rob@cityfam.com. Let me know where you're from. If you're serious about bringing it to wherever you live, I will get you some information or connect you with a person that can give you some next steps. We actually have a Halloween party coming up at the end of October, which is going to be super fun. That's in the Baltimore area. I think Houston might be doing one as well. And then we have a big New Year's Eve party in Baltimore called Charm City Countdown that actually people have came from all over the country to attend. So if you're up for hopping on a plane, if you're not in the area, or maybe jumping on a train or a bus, planes, trains, and automobiles, feel free to come to Baltimore. It's going to be awesome. We're going to be abiding by all the, COVID protocol to make sure it's as safe as possible, but it's always the best party of the year. And you can find more information about that on cityfam.com or charmcitycountdown.com, actually. Next, I want to tell you about a book that Nicole Duhan and myself are writing called Go. And we chose the name based off of when Jesus sent out his disciples. He said, "Go!" ! And, when I look at the way that the modern church operates, it's not much like the early church, and not much like, I think, how Jesus intended church to be. And because of that, the church is losing ground. It's shrinking. I think that between 6,000 and 10,000 churches close every year just in the United States. And that's a problem. And we believe that we've found a nice framework to help churches operate differently and think about how they reach people differently. And we're excited to write it and to get it out and to pastors' hands, forward-thinking pastors, but also just church members, to really challenge them on how to do this differently, how to do life together like they did in the first century. So if you'd like to get yourself a copy, we're pre-selling copies right now at thebookgo.com. You can reserve yours for $19.99, and there's going to be a study guide. There's going to be a sermon series to go with it. So any churches that want to get on board, they're going to be able to, kind of put it right into effect. It's going to be almost cookie cutter. So I'm very excited about it. And we're hoping that's going to come out later this year, maybe early next year at the latest. But you can check that out at thebookgo.com. And last but not least, I just want to mention our sponsor, Micah Hughes. He is a great friend. We've been friends for several years now. Actually, one of my favorite people in the world, one of my favorite people to hang out with. And he's a fellow believer, has a heart for people, and he really wants to help people attain the dream of home ownership. So he does things like helps them get a financial snapshot so they can figure out how much money they're making, where their money's going, what they need to be saving in order to make that dream of home ownership a reality. Sometimes he helps people that have money get into real estate investing. Maybe they want to earn some passive income, buy a property and then rent it out. He shows you how to navigate that journey. He does title and lending. He speaks Spanish. And he just does everything real estate. Even if you have a home that you want to sell quickly, see Micah, he'll take good care of you. If you need to get out of your home in an urgent matter, even if your property is distressed, you can give Micah a call and he will take good care of you. He operates business in almost every state. So just reach out to him, let him know that we sent you, I sent you, mention my name, and you can reach him at 410-999-0495 or Micah Hughes at mundalconsulting.com. And I'll put a link below so you can just copy and paste it. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode with Tullian Tchividjian. All right, today on the show, I have William Graham Tullian Tchividjian, and he is the grandson of Christian evangelist Billy Graham. The middle of seven children, he dropped out of high school and got kicked out of his house at 16 years old. After a few years running from God, God captured him and gave him a burning desire to reach a broken world. He went on to earn his Master's of Divinity degree and pastor the historic Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. He wrote a number of best-selling books, traveled extensively around the country speaking, and then it all came crashing down in late spring of 2015. As a result of infidelity, his marriage ended in divorce, and life as he knew it came to an end. In the aftermath of his season of self-destruction, Tullian met his current wife, Stacy, and together they started another church called The Sanctuary. And we can't wait to talk to you about that redemptive journey. But as partners in life and ministry, Tullian and Stacy are wholeheartedly committed to declaring and delivering God's boundless love to broken people. Welcome to Kowalski Analysis, Tullian Tchividjian.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob. And I must commend you on your pronunciation of my incredibly difficult name. You get a B plus, a B plus.
Only a B?
A B plus.
So you're down in Fort Lauderdale?
Close to Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale is where I was raised. I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, but moved to Fort Lauderdale when I was very young. Spent all of my growing up years there. But my wife, Stacy, and I currently live in Jupiter, Florida, which is about 45 minutes north of Fort Lauderdale. So it's all considered Southeast Florida, the southeast coast of Florida. So we are in the northern part of Palm Beach County. Fort Lauderdale is in Broward County and Miami is in Dade County, but Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade County are all considered South Florida.
Okay. So you look like you work out a little bit.
It is an addiction that I've had for many, many, many years. In fact, it's funny you bring that up. I was going through an old journal from 1994 the other day with my wife. I found it and I started reading some of my journal entries to her. I was 22 years old at the time, and it was the fall of 1994. And in my journal, I am talking almost in every entry about how I need to balance my life a little bit better because I spend too much time in the gym and I'm too obsessed with physical fitness. Yeah. And so I looked at my wife and I started laughing and I said, things haven't changed in like 27 years. It's unbelievable.
Right. No, same, dude. I know. How old are you? You're about my age.
48. I turned 48 this past July. And yeah, I mean, I've been working out basically my entire life. I mean, I was introduced to weightlifting when I was 15 years old by a classmate of mine named Brian Conroy, who was a bodybuilder. I mean, he was a 15, 16-year-old bodybuilder and went on to do bodybuilding after that. And so I kind of got into weightlifting then, but then over the years, I've just constantly switched it up. So I went through different seasons where I was a long distance runner. I went through different seasons where I really focused on bodybuilding type exercise and weight training. Now, for the most part, I do CrossFit type exercising, and have really, in my older age, actually come to love it, because the heavy weightlifting was taking a toll on my joints, and I would wake up every morning feeling sore, and my flexibility was terrible. I mean, my muscles were big, but everything else didn't seem to work very well. I mean, I just couldn't move very well. And so, and I didn't like the way it looked, honestly.
Yeah.
And so, so I had a friend introduce me to a guy who owns a gym here where we live, and it's a CrossFit type gym. And they do a lot of, Navy SEAL type training. And so I've been doing that for about a year and a half, and then supplementing that with some weight training in a regular gym. But I feel better now than I ever have in my entire life. I feel looser than I have in a long, long time. I feel more agile. I feel more flexible. So I feel good. I mean, I really do. I really feel good.
So were you jacked and tatted up like that when you were pastoring?
Well, I did have my tattoos. Yes, I did. As far as jacked, I don't know. You'd have to ask anybody. When you look at yourself every day, I have different people say, wow, you've really put on some weight, like, muscle weight. And then I'll have other people say, wow, you've really leaned down. And I'm like, I look the same to myself every day. I don't know what I look like, honestly.
I love it though. I mean, because for me, like, even my working out is a big part of my witness to people, because some people are going to listen to someone that looks like you that wouldn't listen to like a big overweight pastor that doesn't take care of themselves. Seriously. I know that I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's somebody that disciplines themselves and works out, and you just have a different platform, Well,
and it really is. I tell people this all the time. I work out. I spend as much time as I do in the gym for my brain as I do my body. I mean, really, it is a sanctuary for me. The gym is where I feel most at home, and have felt that way for a long, long time. If I was not called by God to do what I do, I would be a trainer. I would own a gym. I mean, that's my life apart from family, church, and my specific calling that God has given me. I mean, it's diet. It's actually, I'm constantly tweaking stuff. I'm constantly working on different diet experiments and workout experiments, and the combination of both. And it's hard. And I don't think there is one day that I wake up and go, I can't wait to get to the gym today. Okay. I mean, almost every day. So if anybody's out there going, I would love to start working out, but I have no motivation, it's very difficult for me, even though I do it every day or 6 days a week, to feel motivated to go. I mean, there's never a part of me. It's like, I just can't wait to I would say maybe once a month, I will look at the workout of the day online before I go to the gym and go, I'm looking forward to this. Other than that once a month rare occasion, I never want to go. But I'm so glad that I do when 100%. I get there. And I tell people all the time that I work out today, not to feel good tomorrow. I work out today to feel good today, which keeps me going back every day.
Yeah, same. I'm never sorry that I went. It's for me, it's means to an end. As my buddy says, I hate it. I just hate it more when I don't go.
Yes, that's exactly right. My grandmother was once asked if she loved to write, because she was an author. She wrote a number of books, and she was a poet and published a number of her poems. And her answer was the way I feel about working out. She said, I don't enjoy writing, but I enjoy having written.
Right.
And I'm like, that's the way it feels for me. It's not that I love working out, but I love to have worked out.
100%. Yeah. So, I want to talk a little bit. Was that the grandmother that you mentioned? Was that Billy Graham's wife?
Wife, yes. We called her Tete, T-A-I-T-A-I. It means wise old woman in Chinese.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was it like growing up in that family? I mean, yeah, just overall.
Honestly, it was amazing. I think because my granddad was such a famous guy, and, people have to realize too that while he may not be a household name now because he's been out of the public eye, well, he's dead now, but even before he died, for the last 15, 20 years of his life, he was very old and therefore was out of the public eye. And so he wasn't a household name. But when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, even into the early mid 90s, he was a household name, very much so. Yeah. And so people assume that because he was such a famous, well-known guy, that, you know, our upbringing must have been filled with pressure to be a certain way or to do certain things. There must have been a lot of expectations placed on us kids and grandkids by our family. And honestly, that just flat out was not my experience at all. My grandparents were fun-loving, incredibly humble, down-to-earth, everyday people, and they carried themselves that way. So it wasn't actually until I was probably 9 or 10 years old that I really started realizing that my grandparents were important people, which is a testimony to them because they never carried themselves as being super important or bigger or better than anybody else. They really saw themselves as average people, ordinary people called by an extraordinary God to do what God wanted them to do. And so I loved my upbringing. The family that I grew up in was enjoyable. It was fun. It was hospitable. The flavor of Christianity that I was exposed to growing up was not some rules-based, legalistic, moralistic, performance-driven kind of Christianity. It was very grace-oriented. My grandparents were two of the most gracious, most merciful, most loving people I've ever known, and that trickled down throughout the rest of my family. So I am incredibly grateful for the heritage that God has given me. It's nothing that I asked for, and it's nothing that I deserved. I had no control over what family I was born into. And that was God's decision, not mine. And I'm very grateful that God decided to put me in the family that he did and surround me with the kinds of people that he did. I didn't grow up spoiled with a silver spoon in my mouth. None of us kids did. My grandmother grew up on the mission field, so she was very against spoiling anybody, and that trickled down also. But I felt like I had a real normal upbringing for the most part. And when people say, well, what was it like? You know, one of my answers is I don't have anything to compare it to, so I don't really know. Other than it was my life, it was my experience, it was my family, and I'm thoroughly grateful for all of it.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. So curious, what was your first experience with God? Like, I mean, obviously you probably, at least for me, I prayed the sinner's prayer probably 10 times at camp, raised my hand, but I never heard God's voice or felt his presence till I was 27 years old. So I didn't run. Wasn't sure if it was all real. So when I became, an adult, my God became pleasure, and I was out sleeping around and, partying and ended up becoming a stripper and whatever else.
Now I'd like to interview you about that.
Yeah, I'd love to tell you about it. But I would see people praying as an adult, and I would remember thinking, like, I wonder if anybody's really listening. Like, I wasn't sure. But when I was 27, I became very sure. God called me. I heard his voice just as clear as you're talking to me. And I would just wonder what that was like for you. Did you hear God early on, or?
So I have one of those testimonies where I can honestly say, I don't remember the moment or the season in which God rescued me or saved me. And I like that testimony on the one hand. I mean, on the one hand, I would love to have one of those testimonies where I'm like, Saul on the road to Damascus, and a bright light shines and I hear God's voice and I'm knocked off my horse and I get this clarion call to a particular mission and I get up and I go do it. That just wasn't my experience. I was more nurtured into an environment of faith that I believed growing up was very healthy and very realistic. There was nothing overly spiritualized about the faith that I was exposed to growing up. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, my grandparents were real sort of down-to-earth realists. And so their faith had grit to it, and it had teeth to it, and it had flesh and bones to it. And so I just grew up. I can't remember a time in my life where I didn't believe that God existed. I never, even in my most rebellious years as a teenager and later, never did I have any intellectual issues with Christianity. Mine, similar to you, were more functional. Christianity seemed to be a cosmic killjoy to the kinds of things I wanted to pursue. Right. You know, I like you, I was a pleasure-seeking teenager living in South Florida, aka Sodom and Gomorrah, and Christianity seemed very boring to me compared 100%. To what the world offered. So that was the pull for me. It wasn't this intellectual struggle with, I don't know if God exists. I never doubted that God existed. I never doubted that he created everything. I never doubted that Jesus came to this earth and really died on a real cross for real sinners like me. I never doubted that stuff. So in the back of my mind, I always knew that was true. And for me, especially in my teenage years, I kind of assumed that I would live the way that I wanted to live and do the things that I wanted to do and have all the fun that I wanted to have. And that I would eventually, once I got tired of that, go back to God and sort of become an adult. And honestly, in a weird kind of way, that's kind of what happened, other than the fact that I wasn't the one who decided it was enough. God was the one who decided it was enough. Right. And that happened to me when I was 21 years old. I had, as you mentioned when you introduced me, I dropped out of high school at 16. I got kicked out of my home at 16. And the Bible says that sin is pleasurable for a season, but when that season comes to an end, you're left with a gaping hole in your soul that only God is big enough to fill. And that season came to an end for me when I was 21. It wasn't one particular event or a particular crisis. It was just this culminating sense of there's got to be more to life than what I'm experiencing. There has to be more to who I am than who this world is telling me. And so at that point, God, who Francis Thompson, the old poet, refers to as the Hound of Heaven, and I love that phrase because he really did, the Hound of Heaven really did track me down and magnificently defeat me and raise me from death to life. And at that point is when my life really changed. The things that I had been running away from, I started running toward. The things that I used to run toward, I started running away from. And it wasn't this, I knew that an internal change in my desires happened overnight, but it took time. It wasn't an overnight thing where all of a sudden, all of my behavior changed the next day. I mean, it was gradual. It took, months before I really ended up saying goodbye to a lot of the things that I was doing, being weaned off of the lifestyle that I was living and sort of weaved into this new lifestyle that God was calling me to. So the thing is that I did at that time when I was 21, I was so captured and captivated by the amazing grace and outrageous mercy of God that I wanted to spend the rest of my life telling the whole world about this God who graciously and passionately comes after train wrecks like me. I think I kind of grew up with the impression, and this didn't come from my family, this came from churches and, Christian schools and other Christian environments that I was around. But I kind of had this impression that Christianity is for good people.
Right.
And I knew I wasn't good.
Right.
So I just assumed Christianity wasn't for me.
Yeah.
And that it would become for me when I became a better person.
Right.
That's kind of the assumption I had. Well, the fact of the matter is that's completely false. That Christianity is only good news for bad people because bad people are all that there are. In fact, I say this all the time. God loves, pursues, and uses weak people who fail because there aren't any other kinds of people. And so, when that dawned on me, I wanted to tell the world about this amazingly gracious God, because I knew that the impression that a lot of my friends had of God was, well, I'm not into God because God's for good, clean people, and I'm not a good and clean person, so he's not for me. So I wanted to go out there and tell the whole world, God's actually for bad, dirty, weak people. That's who he's for. That's who he's fighting for. That's who he's coming after. That's who he longs to love. God had really changed my life, but I was also heavy into the rave scene in South Florida. So I'm still a huge electronic music.
Ecstasy?
Yes, all of that stuff and everything that goes with it.
Right.
So, but I remember, it was funny. I was at this club that I would always go to, and I remember going, okay, I'll go, but I won't get high. And I was so bored. And so I'm like, this is just not the same. So I went out back with a buddy of mine, and I smoked some weed, and I was like, okay, this should help. Dude, the moment that high hit me, I felt such an overwhelming sense of guilt. I remember standing by the dance floor of this club, and the music was just popping. I mean, I was just, it was perfect. And I'm like praying to God and saying, God, would you just take away this guilt I'm feeling for 1 hour and let me have fun again for 1 hour, just 1 hour. But it's amazing, dude. It's amazing how, that's why when people say you become a Christian and, things get easier. I'm like, dude, you're crazy. Things get way harder, man.
Hell no.
Because now I'm aware that the crap that I'm drawn to is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was totally using, women and drugs and everything as a crutch to mask pain. Now
Right.
Now you're forced to feel it.
Right. Yeah. I know. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. The numbing agent has gone away. And so I really, at that point, I ended up getting married to the girl that I had been dating. I got married very young, 21 years old, to the girl that I'd been dating for about 2 years. Started college at 22 years old, ended up graduating in 3.5 years with a degree in philosophy, and then went on to grad school, got my Master of Divinity degree as I was preparing to be a preacher and a pastor. Went on to serve on staff at a large church in Knoxville, Tennessee for 2 years after graduate school, and then moved back home to South Florida to plant a church in 2003.
Wow. Man, I love that. Just when you were talking about the perception thing, it was very similar for me when I did have a road to Damascus experience. And when God called me, I remember thinking, what in the hell does God want with me? I'm the least religious person I know. Like, I did not view myself as a good person. I kind of thought it was like you, where there were certain people that were born good, or they had a predisposition toward religious people, religion. And I was not one of those people. So I just was kind of disqualified, but it's completely false. And if when you read, you realize that the disciples were all a hot mess, that the religious people are the ones that always opposed Jesus. And he's really the only ones that he criticized was the religious people and called out. And eventually they killed him.
Right. Right. Well, and one of my favorite stories in the Bible is the story of the prostitute who barges into a dinner party where Jesus is eating with some religious leaders. And the religious leaders had invited Jesus over for dinner, and they were asking him questions and talking to him and kind of grilling him because he was this, new kid on the block. And this prostitute, the town prostitute, hears that Jesus is in town, barges in the front door. I mean, if you're a prostitute, the last party you want to crash is a party filled with religious people, but she didn't care. So she barges through the front door, falls on her face, starts cleaning and washing Jesus's feet with her tears and drying his feet with her hair. And of course, all of the religious leaders in the room knew who this woman was. And, they start, talking amongst themselves and essentially saying, if this man knew who this woman was, he would not let her touch him. And Jesus's response to them, knowing that's what they're saying, was essentially this: you guys have it all wrong. You think that she needs to become more like you, but I'm telling you, you actually need to become more like her.
Wow.
And he just completely flips everything upside down. What I call upside down Christianity. It's not really upside down Christianity. It's just Christianity. But
Right.
our perception of what Christianity is completely wrong. And so I think oftentimes we have to go back to the Bible to see just how upside down and counterintuitive Christianity is. Christianity and moralism are two entirely different things. Entirely different things. Christianity is good news for bad people. It's not good advice for good people.
Mhm.
And I think that is a message that needs to get out there far and wide, because most of the people that I know who reject the Christian faith are not really rejecting the Christian faith. What they're rejecting is a caricature of the Christian faith that is primarily focused on behavior, becoming better, doing more, trying harder, climbing higher, all of that stuff, behavior modification, cleaning up your act, that sort of thing. And that's just not Christianity. That is religion. Yeah. Christianity is not good advice for good people. It's good news for bad people. In fact, one of the things that I've said on numerous occasions is Christianity is not about a moral code to keep. Christianity is about Jesus, who died for those of us who could not keep the moral code. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was thinking about, I posted something a while back. I'm curious to hear if it's theologically accurate, because I think about disciples, right? So the word disciple, and Jesus could have called his followers anything, right? He could have said they were followers, or, lots of other words for followers, but he said disciples. And I look at disciple, and it's like part of the root word is discipline.
Yeah.
So is it possible to be a follower and not live a disciplined life, or at least pursue discipline?
The short answer is yes. And that's good news for everybody out there who's undisciplined. Okay, so let me say this. On the one hand, I think obviously, as I said just a minute ago, I mean, Christianity is good news for people who fail, because people who fail are all that there are.
Right.
We all fail in a variety of different ways every single day. We all fall short of God's standard of perfection every day in 1,000 different ways. None of us are good enough to be loved by God. God loves us not because we are good. God loves us because he is good. So that has to be stated at the outset. On the other hand, once God intervenes, and once God, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, magnificently defeats us, he begins, like he did with me, prompting us to go after the things he wants us to go after, and to run away from the things that he wants us to run away from. And so we begin, in a sense, kind of falling out of love with some of the things we used to love, and falling in love with some of the things we used to hate.
Yeah.
Well, inevitably, that will carry with it some measure of discipline.
Right.
I think that, for instance, I dropped out of high school, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, when I was 16 years old. Well, one of the things God gave me, implanted in me when he rescued me, was this overwhelming hunger and thirst to learn and to read and to study. And so I became like this massive egghead almost overnight. My brain was asking questions so fast about reality, life, the meaning, purpose, whatever, sort of the perennial questions of existence. My mind was asking these questions, and I just could not read fast enough or study enough to get the answers that I was looking for. So, I mean, I was just perpetually head stuck in books. And people who knew me at that time laughed, because they're like, dude, you never read a book in your life. I mean, I read Surfer magazine growing up. That's the extent of it. And so, in that sense, God gave me this hunger, this thirst, this longing to read, to study, and I became a very disciplined reader. But that wasn't the result of me picking myself up by my bootstraps. That was a matter of me simply responding to new desires that God had given me.
Yeah, that's good. The way I view God, sometimes I look at it through a fitness lens myself. I actually did bodybuilding in my early 20s, just a little bit. And, I look at God as almost being like that personal trainer that knows exactly what you need to do to get you in the shape that you need to be. And I think about Jesus says, like, if you abide in me, you'll bear much fruit. And it's almost like a trainer or a good dietitian that says, like, look, if we work together, you're going to win a lot. You're going to win a lot of trophies. You're not always going to like the shit I put you through.
Yeah.
And just let everyone know, Tullian gave me permission to cuss. So,
Seriously. Yeah.
but he's basically like, look, if you work with me, you're going to win a lot, but you're not always going to like the things I put you through in the moment. Because a good personal trainer, you're not going to like the workouts, and you're definitely not going to like the diet and all the other things, but you're going to win. And I think like God's always thinking about the later on. He knows what you want most, and he wants to give it to you. You just won't like it all the time in the process, because like you're going to be on a treadmill at 5 a.m. running, gasping for air. Who likes that? Nobody. But he knows.
And a lot of this stuff, well, you're right. And a lot of this stuff, at least in my own life, is not stuff that I have volunteered for. And because I haven't volunteered for it, in other words, to sort of carry your analogy further, if I'm up at 5 a.m. running on a treadmill, it's not because I set my alarm, it's because God woke me up. Now, that's an analogy for life to say, okay, in my own experience, the things that God has used to grow me the most, to make me the most empathetic to other people, to give me the most wisdom, to give me the most, care and compassion for those around me. Though it's almost always been suffering, loss, crashing and burning, a deep sense of desperation. Yeah. Those are, that is sort of the God's training regiment to make us into the kinds of people that he wants us to be. And so there is no wisdom. There's no way to get wisdom. There's no way to get empathy. There's no way to get compassion. There's no way to get those really important, sturdy, substantive things apart from suffering, in my opinion. I mean, if there was another way, I think I would pursue it with all of my might. The fact of the matter is, we are broken people living in a broken world with other broken people. Suffering is inevitable. And when God is the master shaper of our lives, he will use that suffering in our lives to make us into the kinds of people he wants us to be. More sturdy people, people who have something to give, people who are gracious, people who are forgiving, people who are loving. Some of the hardest people that I know are people whose lives have been relatively easy. Some of the most arrogant people that I know, some of the people who are the most self-righteous are people who have not really experienced a deep sense of their own desperation. And I just don't think there is any way to attain or get the things that God wants us to get apart from difficulty, desperation, crashing and burning.
No, I agree. Even the word says that even Jesus was made perfect through suffering. And if he's the Son of God and he had to suffer to be made perfect, how much more do we? Yeah. I actually posted something the other day where I was like, I was just thinking about, I expressed to a friend, I said, there's been large parts of my life that I haven't enjoyed in a long time. I've endured them. I haven't enjoyed them. I've endured them. And then I was thinking about that statement to a friend, and I was thinking about what it says, how the glory set before him, he endured the cross. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, there's only really one way to endure things, or to have endurance. You have to endure things. You have to build up that muscle. And if you look at Jesus' last 3 years of ministry, they weren't easy. Like he didn't even have a home. Like he was out always pouring himself out. but I believe that process developed the endurance that he needed to go to the cross when the time was right. And I'm like, so for me, I'm like, I don't know what I'm being prepared for exactly, but there's really only one way to get endurance, and you got to just endure crap. If you're, like you said, if your life is perfect, how are you going to have endurance? How are you going to have perseverance?
Well, and I was telling a friend the other day who, is in a difficult marriage. And I was telling this person, I was describing my grandparents' marriage, Billy and Ruth Graham's marriage. And I said they loved each other. They were married for, 60 some odd years. They were absolutely committed to one another. They were loyal to one another. But it was a hard marriage because he would be gone sometimes for 3, 4, 5 months at a time, especially when the kids were young. And she was left to essentially raise the kids by herself for, half the year. And even when he was home, because he was away so much, even when my granddad was home, he wanted to help in whatever ways he could, but he didn't really know how. And my grandmother, according to my mom and her siblings, my aunts and uncles, they never heard my grandmother complain, not one time, about my granddad being gone, about how, ministry is more important than family to your father. Never anything like that. They would oftentimes see her on her knees next to her bed, praying early in the morning or late at night. She wrote a lot of poetry where she poured out her heart to God. But I was telling this friend of mine who's in this difficult marriage, I said, my grandmother was, without question, the wisest person I have ever known. She was one of my best friends. When she died in June 2007, I lost not just a grandmother, I lost a friend, a confidant, someone that I could go to with anything. She was always cheering me on. She was the first person, her and my dad were the first people that I would always go to when I needed help or advice with something. And I just told this friend, I said, if my grandmother's marriage to my grandfather had been easy, she would have never been the kind of woman that she became. It was the pain and the difficulty, the loneliness, the desperation, the feeling of, does God care about me at all? He calls me to marry this man and then takes him away for half the year, every year. It was that struggle. It was the struggle of being a broken person, living in a broken world with other broken people, that made her the woman of substance that she became. And as a result of becoming that way, she was able to help countless people, including me. And so, suffering is something that I know we tend to avoid at all costs, understandably so. Who volunteers for this stuff? But because suffering, the way to wisdom is paved in suffering, and because God wants us to be wise, he will bring things into our lives that will get us there. There's this Job, the character in the Old Testament, who was this wealthy, rich guy, great reputation, healthy family. He himself was healthy physically, lost everything. Lost everything. The Bible tells his story about how he lost his children, he lost his money, he lost his reputation. Almost overnight, the guy lost everything. And he wrestles with God about this stuff. And his friends wrestle with God about this stuff. And they're wrestling one another about this stuff. And why is this happening? And all of that. And at the end of Job chapter 42, the very end, Job says something that has always stuck with me. He says to God, before my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. In other words, he's confessing that he went from hearing about God to seeing God. And his testimony is that going from hearing to seeing happened as a result of loss and suffering, that there is no such thing as going from hearing to seeing without pain, without difficulty, without struggle.
Sure. So everybody, sounds like something you want to sign up for, right?
Yeah, right. I know. That's why I'm like, oh my gosh, I just pray Jesus comes back quickly. I'm so tired.
Yeah. So basically, okay, you get out of school, you climb in ministry, you're speaking all over the country, you write these best-selling books. And then was there some problems at home, I'm guessing, before everything?
Yes. And I can see those much more clearly now than I could at the time.
Sure.
My first wife and I met when we were 18 years old. Neither of us were walking with God. We were on the opposite end of the spectrum of walking with God when we met. God changed her life at the same time he changed my life. When we were both 21, we got engaged, we got married. We had our first child at 22, our second child at 24, our third child at 28. And so our lives changed and developed very quickly. The first 7 years we were married, I was in college and graduate school, and then went on to this church in Knoxville that I mentioned, this large church in Knoxville where I served on the staff, and then back home to South Florida to start a church in 2003. And, I look back now, and of course, I can see things much more clearly than I could at the time. But there were, when I say problems, there weren't like these massive issues that were clearly identifiable. I mean,
Right.
there was, life was busy and kids were small and we're running 1,000,000 miles an hour. It's sort of the classic, okay, life is going and we're not taking enough time to really nurture us. And I mean, my first wife was my best friend. So it's not like we went on date nights and we went on vacation together, and I loved my family. And, so it wasn't, that we were completely isolated from each other and hated each other. It wasn't like that at all.
Sure.
But, as life went on, and as some of these smaller things that should have been attended to in our early 20s were never properly attended to, that starts growing and growing and growing. And without offering too much commentary, because it's not just my story to tell, it's her story to tell.
Absolutely.
Also. But I mean, it just, certain things happened in the last couple of years we were married that I think, in retrospect and looking back, and I think kind of pulled us apart in ways that we did not realize at the time.
Sure.
And as a result of some of those things happening, that first marriage came to an end, in part because I was unfaithful to my first wife. And that was, 5.5 years ago now. And because I was a public person, and I was leading a public ministry and all of those things, the story became very, very public. And so it was all over the place. When I say all over the place, I mean all over the place.
Yeah.
People Magazine, USA Today, the
Wow.
National Enquirer. I mean, you name it. It was everywhere.
Wow.
The little ticker on the bottom of CNN and Fox
Oh my
News. I mean, it
gosh.
was all over the place. And so my most embarrassing, shameful moment, the one thing you wouldn't want anyone else to know about,
Yeah.
was exposed for the world to see. And as you can imagine, when that happened, everything blew up, everything. And so I went through, in spring of 2015, all the way through the summer of 2016, basically, that whole first year and 3 or 4 months after I crashed and burned and everything blew up, was by far the roughest time of my life. I was massively suicidal. I had never experienced a suicidal thought in my life up until that point. And there wasn't a day that went by that I didn't contemplate killing myself. I lost everything overnight. My self-destruction was self-imposed. So it's not like I was blaming everybody else. I was blaming myself primarily, and the guilt and the shame of it all seemed too much to bear at the time.
Mhm.
I was hopeless for the first time in a long time. I was, previous to that, living a life that I really enjoyed in terms of ministry and a lot of the people that I was doing ministry with. I really enjoyed my life and didn't want it to end as abruptly and as destructively as it did, and it did. And so I found myself, I was 42 at the time, and I found myself undergoing this massive identity crisis at 42 years old, because I had so attached my identity, my worth, my value, my significance to the things that I did, the people that I knew, the life that I had. So with all of that stuff now gone, I didn't know who in the hell I was.
Right.
And so I found myself searching under every rock and behind every tree like a desperate 15-year-old boy trying to find himself. And so God commenced at that time a massive deconstruction project of me. And that went on for a couple, I mean, that will continue to go on for the rest of my life, but it commenced in earnest at that season, during that season of my life, where he was just putting me to death in some incredibly specific ways. And it was during that time that I met my current wife, Stacy. Poor woman. God dropped her into my life. I didn't know who she was. She knew who I was because she had listened to my sermons and read my books. But I had no idea who she was. We became pen pals at first, and then we became good friends, and then we fell in love with each other, and we got married in August of 2016. But God brought her into my life at the absolute perfect time. She had gone through her own crises years before and had come out on the other side, wise and grounded and spiritually and emotionally mature and intelligent. And so she was an incredible God-sent guide to me during the worst season of my life. And this poor woman, I mean, she was basically living with a guy and learning to love a guy who was going through emotional, spiritual, mental detox and rehab.
Yeah.
And so it was rough. I mean, it was, while we were falling in love, I was also in a massive transition from one life to another life, from one person, meaning me. This person was being put to death, and this person was being brought to life, a new person. And so that was a rough transition. But here we are. We have been married now for four years, and what's today? I won't say the date because I don't know when this is going to air, but
yeah.
We have been married for 4 years and 1 month, and been together for 5 years. And a year and a half ago, we were asked by a group of people here in Jupiter, Florida, if we would consider moving here to start a church, which I was not interested in doing at all. That was not what I was looking for. That was not what I wanted to do.
What were you going to do for work? Just out of curiosity, were you going to train, or what were you going to do for work?
So, for the first year or so, I, did well. For the first year, I really didn't work. I mean, I had enough saved up to which was good because I needed that time off, and I was in intensive counseling, and my life was a complete mess. So if I had to work at that time, it would have been a complete disaster.
Right. Sure.
After that first year was over, I did some consulting work with a couple of different churches, just sort of behind the scenes stuff, contract work. I went off the grid completely for about 2.5 years. And then in the fall of 2017 is when I sort of came out from hiding and started writing again and jumped back on social media. And I was convinced at that time that I was being called by God to be as uncomfortably transparent and honest about my own journey and my own story as I could possibly be. I was going to tell the truth about myself, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help me God. That's what I felt called to do, and to really connect the amazing grace of God with the darkest parts of me. And to do that via writing and speaking and whatnot. So as I wrote about my story, increasingly so, I started getting invitations to speak. And so it got to the point where my wife and I were traveling every weekend. She was my travel partner. I would speak, and she was sort of my, traveling administrator. She kept me organized, but we were traveling almost every weekend to different churches, events, conferences, retreats, whatever. And I was speaking, and I hated that life. I am, as you are probably similar, if you are as regimented as I am in terms of diet, exercise, routine, that sort of thing. I hate traveling because it totally gets me out of my routine. So here I was we were flying out wherever we were going every Friday and flying back every Sunday or Monday. And so we were home basically 4 days a week and away 3 days a week. And I hated it. So when this call came, we did that for about a year and a half. So when this call came for us to consider the possibility of planting a church in Jupiter, on the one hand, I was like, there's no way. Like, I don't want to travel anymore, and I want to be in one place and plant some serious roots and stay there for the rest of my life. So that's attractive to me, but I don't want to do that by planting a church. Like, I don't want to pastor a church again. I was still experiencing some PTSD from my church experience.
Yeah.
Churches are notoriously terrible at handling moral crises in leadership. Terrible. And my experience was not unique in that regard. It also was terrible. And so I was reticent about getting back involved in church life. But they called and we wrestled and prayed. And after about 3 or 4 months of really wrestling with God, he got us to the point where we agreed to come. And so we planted the Sanctuary. That's the name of our church. Officially a year ago. We were 6 months old when everything shut down. So we went exclusively online, and we're getting ready to reopen here in a couple weeks.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said about churches being notoriously terrible. And I heard a friend that's a pastor say there's grace in Christ, but not in Christ's church.
There's sadly a lot of truth to that. There really is. In fact, one of the things that I say all the time is, churches should be the safest place for fallen people to fall down and broken people to break down. But all too often, it's the scariest place.
Yeah.
And that's a tragedy to me.
Why? And I really have a problem with that because, like I see most Christians, not most, I don't know, probably most actually, at least people that are like really seeped in it. They become like more like the Pharisees than they're like Jesus, where they're the ones that are just like the sin police, are criticizing people. And I'm like, Jesus said that they'll know us by our love for each other. So if we're not unified, how in the hell are people going to know who we are? I actually think about, so when I was a stripper, I transitioned into nightclub promoting.
We're going to get back to that, by the way.
Yeah. The reason it happened was because I would go out with all my stripper friends, right? Yeah. Girls and guys. And we loved being around each other. And we were a hot mess. I mean, yeah. But people saw this, like we would go in and kiss each other on the lips and, no homo, I have to say that, but it was just like, we really liked hanging out with each other. We had this unity to us, and people gravitated toward us. And eventually it led to me going into nightclub promoting because people just went where we went, and I was able to monetize it. And I saw that principle work in something that was the furthest thing from Christianity, but people are attracted to unity. They love to see it. And I look at the church today and I'm like, man, you got people criticizing Joel Osteen. And I'm like, what, dude? Like, he's reaching millions of people. Like, like my dad, who wasn't even a Christian, used to watch Joel Osteen. Like, I just see we tear each other down. My pastor says we eat our own. And I'm like,
we shoot our wounded, they say.
What is that all about? Like, why do people do that?
Yeah, man, it's not unique to our day. This is the way it's been from the beginning. I mean, my goodness, Cain killed his brother Abel because he was jealous.
Right.
God had received his sacrifice, that God received Abel's sacrifice, not his. I mean, this world is a broken, fallen place. And I think we make a mistake when we conclude that the church is exempt from brokenness and fallenness. It's absolutely not. It is broken and fallen because the people who occupy it are broken and fallen. I think that some people assume that when we become Christians, the typical weaknesses and brokenness of humanity ceases to exist, and it doesn't. It just gives us a perspective on it, and it gives us a way to deal with it, and it promises that God will walk through us in all of it. But I mean, it's nothing unique. I think this is the way it has been. This is the way it is. This is the way it will be. It's sad to me. I mean, we named our church the Sanctuary on purpose because We wanted specifically for our church to be a place where people could tell the truth about themselves without fear of rejection. Interestingly enough, historically, and this was one of the primary reasons we named the church what we did, historically, sanctuaries were places where guilty people who knew they were guilty could run to and at least avoid temporary consequences from the civil law. So if anyone is listening or watching and remembers Les Miserables, when Jean Valjean is running from the police, he runs to a convent. And when the police show up to the convent knowing he's in there, they can't get in. The law had to stop at the door. So we named our church the Sanctuary because not only did we want it to be a place, a safe place where people could tell the truth about themselves without fear of rejection, where people could take off their masks and not pretend that they're better than they are and still experience the love and forgiveness that they need. But it's also a place where guilty people who know they are guilty come. Now, what's happened inside the church, and I mentioned it a little while ago, is we assume that church is for good people rather than guilty people.
Right.
And so you have people who come to church and who automatically think that by virtue of being here, we are better than the people who aren't here. I mean, we are the good people in society. Look at us. We're not sleeping in. We're not playing golf. We're not on the boat. We're not, nursing our hangover. We're in church and we're worshiping God and we're listening to the Bible. Well, I mean, that in and of itself can generate an ethos of self-righteousness that doesn't know what to do with real sin when it happens in front of their face.
Right.
And so, I have a good friend who's a Lutheran pastor on the southwest coast of Florida, and he's been in ministry for 50 years. He's in his early 60s, mid 60s now, and he said, I have been in ministry for 40, 50 some odd years. And when it comes to sin inside the church, I have been disappointed with the way the church has handled it for 40 or 50 some odd years. And he said, why is it that the one institution that still at least claims to believe in original sin is so shocked when they encounter it? It's really unbelievable, man. I mean, I just think the church as an institution is so far off in its messaging that we have no idea what to do with real sin in the camp. We have no idea. And that is a sensitive spot for me because I not only watched the way, not just my church, but the church at large kind of handled me. And dude, I was a train wreck. I was scrambling at the time and I was angry. And it's not like I deserved love and grace and mercy and forgiveness, but that's what I needed at the time. And I really, I felt completely abandoned and ostracized by the institution I had given my life to serve. Now, that's not me whining and complaining, going, because God brought people into my life and surrounded me with people that did love me and that did help me and that did walk me through it. But the church as an institution failed. Yeah. It flat out failed. And I hear from people all over the world on a weekly basis who have bottomed out, who have crashed and burned, who feel as a result abandoned by their community of faith because they don't meet the standard or they failed to meet the standard or whatever the case may be. And I just, I don't think that our little church is going to change the direction of church at large, but I do hope that we can become a safe haven for people, not just locally, but as they connect with us globally in, from a technological standpoint and a virtual standpoint. I do hope that we can, in some small way, pioneer a new flavor of what the church has always been supposed to be from the beginning.
I love it. I love it. I actually was thinking about, I started a nonprofit a few years ago called City Fam. You can see the sign behind me.
I can see it.
And it's really just about, for me, it started as, so the first 6 years I was a Christian. So I was a club promoter, had a very active social life, a lot of friends. I became a Christian. Life got very boring. Like you said, killjoy, staying home every night, not sure what do I even do with myself anymore. Where are the cool Christians? Started looking for people. Couldn't find anybody like me.
Yeah.
The people in church were very nice, but they were kind of boring and weren't doing anything. So I just, instead of, this is where God got me, because he's smart. Like he told me about a specific girl, and he was basically like, this is your person. She lived in California. I lived on the East Coast. So I waited for her. I would have dated out of loneliness if not, because I was so freaking lonely and depressed. I would have dated out of loneliness. That's of course. But I waited for this girl 6 years, never came. So it turned 6 years of abstinence, 6 years of feeling like an alien in the world. Eventually I backslid. I went back to the bars because I was like, F it. I need to be around some people again. I need to have a social life. I have not enjoyed my life for 6 years. So of course, drinking too much, start sleeping around. Eventually I'm doing drugs again, end up right back to where I started, except now all the pain and the shame and just knowing that I knew better now. Now I had a conscience.
Right. Yeah. Now you actually felt guilty.
Oh God, it was way worse. So now I rededicate, go through the exact same period for about a year, not knowing, every night rent Redbox movies, literally rented Dolphin Tale on a Saturday night. That I had seen every other movie in Redbox. I rented Dolphin Tale. I was so mad. I'm like, this is bullshit. This is what people have to go through when they become a Christian, or maybe they're just trying to get sober or whatever it is. How's anybody do it? This is too hard. So I started a nonprofit based on the fact that, look, I want to have fun. I just don't want to have regrets on Monday. Fun without regrets is what we say. And, I've seen a lot of people come to the Lord through it, which, anyway, the executive director, her name is Nicole Richards. She actually used to be on full-time staff at a church, and she went through a divorce. Her husband was unfaithful multiple times, and it was a Baptist church. The elders told her, basically ride it out, don't file. So she filed for divorce, and they fired her. So she really felt very abandoned by the church, and I see a lot of that, for us, so we're co-author in a book called Go. I want to send you a copy, an advanced reader's copy.
I love it.
I'd love to get your endorsement if you first off, if you read it and you believe in it. But it really is just about like how off we are to the first century church, because they were just a group of people meeting in each other's house, eating together, doing life together, serving each other and the community. And it says the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. Like the average church doesn't even lead 10 people to Jesus in a year. I'm like, so we are at the minimum, you should have 365, right? So I'm like, we are way off of what it's supposed to be.
And here's one of the things that I've said for a long, long time, many years now. If we're not attracting the same kinds of people Jesus attracted, we're not preaching the same message that Jesus preached, period. Right. And oftentimes what happens is that the people who were repulsed by Jesus, the very moralistic religious people, are the people who fill our churches. And the people who flocked to Jesus would never darken the door to our churches.
So good.
And that's just a tragedy to me. I mean, that says something, man. It says something to me. If you go out and you ask 10 anonymous people, 10 complete strangers, okay? You're in the grocery store and you ask 10 people. You say, listen, I'm doing a survey and I just have one question for you. If the worst parts of you were exposed for the whole world to see, if everything that God knows about you was made public for the world to see, is church the first place or the last place you would run to for help and safe haven? Every single one of them, dude, every one would say the last place. Yeah. Well, that's a problem. Yeah. I mean, just to put it bluntly, that is a problem.
Totally.
It should be the first place, and it's all too often the last place. And, it's like I said a few minutes ago, the church should be the safest place for fallen people to fall down. And oftentimes it's the scariest place for fallen people to fall down. And, whether the suffering that you're going through was caused by someone else, like your partner in crime there at City Fam, in that case, it was her husband She was suffering because of what someone else has done. Or you're suffering because of what you have done. The suffering that you've brought upon yourself and as a result brought upon other people. What in my experience, what I've seen over the years is that when someone is suffering because of what someone else has done to them, the church is a little, not a lot better, but it's a little bit better in handling sufferers who are suffering because of what someone else has done. But if you're suffering because of what you yourself have done, the church is terrible in handling sufferers like that. And they become very hard-edged and very hard-nosed. And it ceases to be a place of grace. It becomes a place of retribution rather than restoration.
Yeah.
All too often when you're dealing with someone who is crashing and burning because of foolish, destructive decisions they've made. The church doesn't really know how to handle people like that. And that's a shame to me, because the gospel is not only for the sufferer who's suffering because of what someone else has done, it's also good news for the sufferer who's suffering because of what they themselves have done.
Yeah. Amen to that. So what does the future hold?
Man, well, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we are excited to be reopening the sanctuary in a couple weeks. One of the things that this shutdown has afforded us is we were previously meeting in a high school auditorium on Sunday mornings. And of course, all that went away when COVID showed up and the shutdown happened. And so it gave us the time to find a permanent location, which we did. And we would have already reopened because there are no longer any restrictions around here. So we would have already reopened, except our new space is not yet ready, but it's almost there. And so we are reopening on Sunday, November 1st, and we're super excited about that. You know, to be honest with you, man, I felt like I achieved almost everything I wanted to achieve in my former life. You know, I mean, I was, in terms of the industry that I was in, I had reached the peak. And, you know, sermons broadcast on TV around the world every week, and on the radio every day, and books and traveling and pastoring a large church, and all the stuff. And then it all went away. And for a while, as I mentioned, didn't know who I was without that stuff. And God killed me and brought me back to life. And there are still some things I miss about my former life, but I don't miss the person that I was. And I'm so much more free now than I ever was. I was free before. All the books that I wrote were written before this happened.
All of it.
Yeah, all of it.
I wonder that about the book about grace. My pastor said,
all of my books are about grace. It's basically the same message with a different book title. But I mean, literally, you're talking about one way love, but yeah, all of that happened before. The last book I published was in 2014. Okay. So, and all this happened in 2015. So yeah, I just, you know, what I'm talking about now, the message that I'm talking about now is the same message that I was preaching and writing about before. And so I thought I was kind of free before, but in retrospect, I realized I was enslaved to things I didn't realize. So, dude, I was dead in the water 5 years ago. Dead in the water. Hopeless, suicidal, convinced that my best days were behind me. Now we live in Jupiter, Florida. Okay, it's kind of a quiet, quaint little beach town north of West Palm Beach. I'm out of the hustle and bustle of Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. We live in this, you know, 2-bedroom, 2-bath villa that we rent. I probably have less now than I've ever had, you know, at least as an adult. Life has been scaled down. I've gone from pastoring this, you know, large famous church to this small startup church. I don't have publishers beating my door down to write books anymore. I don't have conferences beating my door down to speak, or the Christianity Today and the periodicals ask me to write art. I mean, that's gone. And dude, I am more content now than I've ever been in my life. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart. If my life did not improve one whit. If I never had one more dollar than I have now, a bigger house than I have now, a better car, a bigger church, blah, blah, all that stuff that didn't seem like it mattered a lot to me back then, but in retrospect, I think it mattered too much. Dude, I just don't care, man. I don't care if our church has 50 people or 5,000 people. I don't care. I don't care if I write another book. I don't care. I'm just so grateful to be alive, man.
Yeah.
I really am. I'm grateful to be alive. The one word that always comes back to me when I think about a word that describes this season in my life is just gratitude.
Yeah.
I am so grateful to God that he did not abandon me the way that, some friends and, institutions did. That he stuck with me. Someone once said, if you're not dead, God's not done. And I'm so grateful for that. God's given me an amazing woman. I have an amazing relationship with my 3 kids. They're all older now. They're, 25, 23, and 19. So they're all older now. I have an amazing relationship with my kids. Have 2 grandkids. Love my wife. I'm just grateful for life and that I'm still here.
Well, I'm believing that we met for a reason, and I really think you get it, man. And who knows? I'd love to come down there, visit the sanctuary, grab a workout with you, and see if we can't shake up the church world a little bit and get their head out of the butt.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, man. I mean, I think that there are some people who would just assume I go away forever. Like, this guy's still around. Can't he do anything else to make a living? Like, why is he doing, it's so funny. My wife from time to time will hear the criticism that, well, he's back into ministry because he just can't stay away from the spotlight. Okay. And my wife, who has watched me now for the last 4 years get crucified by the Christian community.
Yeah.
She's like, are these people stupid? Like, literally, the one industry that you are going to get the most criticism from is the Christian community. Like, do they really think that, like, that's the furthest thing from your mind? Like, it would be, I wouldn't get any criticism if I went and sold cars or opened a gym. People would just be like, okay, good. So, yeah, we are
accuse Jesus of it. They even accuse Jesus of being, like, egotistical or whatever. I'm like, and if he couldn't please everybody, you're damn sure not gonna.
No, and I probably have a little bit more ego than Jesus, but but I mean, the fact of the matter is, we are doing what we're doing because we feel summoned and called. This isn't easy. Like I said, it's the one industry where I will get criticized for being involved with it, and criticism's never fun, but I don't care about that stuff. The people who know me and the people who have walked with me, they're behind us and they're with us. And I'm so grateful for the people that God has brought into my life. I've said this a lot, but when you're at the top, it's almost impossible to know who your friends are.
Yeah.
When you're at the bottom and all you have to offer is leprosy and liability to people, you discover quickly who your friends are. And so God has brought people into my life now that are better friends than I've ever had. I have a more solid community of friendship now than I ever have. And just meeting new people like you and sharing stories and connecting in those places where we have failed rather than bragging about our successes. That's the relational good stuff.
Yeah, love that. So where can people find you?
Well, I'm on social media. So, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I think my Facebook and Twitter handle are at Tullian T, and my Instagram handle is at Tullian TCH. I have a website, just tullian.net. Our church has a website. I think it's the sanctuaryfl.org.
Okay.
So yeah, and we, I don't have a team of people that respond to emails. I am the team of people. My wife and I are the team of people. So people can reach out. We do our best to get back to everybody. And because of my story in particular, and also my wife's story, people feel comfortable telling us their own story and opening up to us in ways that they might not to other people, we welcome that. We have lots of friends that we've never met around the country, around the world, that we have walked with for seasons because of things they've gone through. So, you know, we're here for as many people as we can be for.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to put all those links in the show notes when I throw this up, and so the people reach out. And I expect that they will, because you're speaking the language of a lot of my friends and people that follow me. But man, it was a real pleasure. Thank you for coming on and talking to me.
No, thanks for having me on. Seriously, man. I look forward to doing it again.
Okay, Tullian. Have a great day. See ya.
Thanks, man.